I'm Matt Dixon, and welcome to the Purple Patch Podcast. The mission of Purple Patch is to empower and educate every human being to reach their athletic potential. Through the lens of athletic potential, you reach your human potential. The purpose of this podcast is to help time-starved people everywhere integrate sport into life. Greetings, guys. Just before we get going on the show, today we're going to hear a case study of a busy executive seeking performance in sport, work, and life. Now, David, our guest, has adopted a performance mindset and is a great example of what I would label high coachability, gaining performance gains across all areas of his life. Success with anyone, and of course David being a prime example of this, requires a strong platform of health and resilience. It also requires some precision around focus on the things that are actually going to yield performance gains. A tool in our toolbox that we leverage to refine our focus and get really specific is Insight Tracker. David leverages Insight Tracker, and by assessing his biometrics and aligning it with the recommendations from the scientists and experts at Insight Tracker, David and I are able to take actionable steps to deliver a platform of health and ensure that his training is really productive. The measurable results and the tracking help with accountability. The education and resources are, of course, invaluable. And guess what? Insight Tracker is not just reserved for Purple Patch athletes just like David. You can utilize it too. All you need to do is head to insighttracker.com/purplepatch. That's insighttracker.com/purplepatch and use this sneaky code, PurplePatchPro20. That's PurplePatchPro20. You'll get 20% off everything at the store. A kickstart to your measurable results across your performance journey. All right, let's get on with the show. And welcome to the Purple Patch Podcast. As ever, your host, Matt Dixon, and we march on together. Yes, this month is our month of case studies. And the theme of today's is coachability. One of my favorite words. We're going to welcome Purple Patch athlete David Farsai to the show. Now, David recently had a breakthrough personal performance at IRONMAN Coeur. That's a wonderful little town based right in the heart of Idaho. And in that race, he qualified for the IRONMAN World Championships, which are this September in Nice for the male athletes. But it isn't the result that really demands our attention here. I work with David on a one-to-one basis, and I believe that he is a prime example of our word of the day, coachability. Now, in today's discussion, I want you to listen to David's mindset around coaching, how he views the role of sport across all arenas of life, and most importantly, how he's managed to successfully apply the mindset and strategies into real-life work problems. And of course, how he applied his mindset and strategies that we tried to enforce during the coaching process into race day. You see, his Ironman race day in Coeur d'Alene was not, quote, the perfect race. In fact, it was full of adversity and little setbacks that for many athletes would just lead them into the gutter of despair. But during the race, he successfully deployed his lessons from coaching and it impacted the result in a major way. And of course, that result was positive. So I think that there are a lot of lessons here and a great example that we're going to unpack in this case study around how to optimize your coaching relationship, whoever your coach is. But who is David? Well, he's a father of two and a husband. He's a partner of Mainsail, which is a software-focused private equity investment firm. And he's only been doing triathlons since 2019. His background in sports is purely team sports as a youth. And I think that his story is really valuable, highly educational, and I think will inspire many of you folks to get cracking on your own performance journey. And that really excites me. But before we get going here, Barry, I do need to do a couple of bits of news. And so let's dive into it. Let's do Matt's Newsings. Yes, folks, it is Matt's Newsings. And guess what? We want to hear from you. We've got a survey. This is how you access the survey. Head to the website, purplepatchfitness.com/survey. Very simple and easy to remember. purplepatchfitness.com/survey. Barry will put it into the show notes, of course. But this is a survey where we want to investigate what you guys are looking for, what you want, how Purple Patch can help you. Give us some feedback on how we go about things. And this is really, really important for us. We take your guys' opinion really, really seriously. But the only way that we can mold our offerings, our education, and how we set up our programming around your needs, what you're really looking for, is by asking you and hearing from you. And guess what? The survey only takes a couple of minutes. It's very, very quick, no more than 5 minutes of your time. But by you taking the survey, I promise you, it's going to really help us. It's going to help us drive and deliver the education that you want and the program that is going to help you thrive and be successful. And so today, it is a big ask for you. If you could just take 5 minutes out of your day, the link is in the show notes, purplepatchfitness.com/survey, and you get a blank land slate with some tailored questions around it to give us your opinions and your thoughts, and it's going to help us become even better. After all, one of the Purple Patch sayings that we always like to say, evolve or die. We need to grow, we need to improve, and this is a big part of it. So we want to hear from you on that. Now, second thing I'll just do before we get into the meat and potatoes, I do want to remind you now is a wonderful time for you to think about joining us at Purple Patch. You're going to hear from some highly successful coaching relationships over the next couple of weeks. We're also going to go into some cautionary tales towards the end of the month. But I tell you, the reason this is a great time is we have a very big end of year set of plans for all of our athletes. In fact, in Q4, we are going to do a completely reimagined set of programming that's going to be focused all around technical and skill development, a host of community activities, a really deep educational program, and some options around specific strength training and even body composition done right in the right context. It is a wonderful time and opportunity for you to build the athlete, all while having a whole bunch of flexibility and ensuring that it's not overwhelming. It's going to be a lot of fun. Myself and the Purple Patch coaches are really, really excited. And so if you're interested, feel free to reach out. If you want to hear more, you can head to purplepatchfitness.com or just have a friendly complimentary conversation with us. info@purplepatchfitness.com will tell you all about it and your plans. We'll understand your situation a little bit and can give you a little bit of free guidance. All right, I hope that helps. Barry, it is a crack today. I'm really excited. It's going to be a lot of fun. Let's get going. It is, ladies and gentlemen, time for David Farsai, and it is the meat and potatoes. All right, guys. Yes, indeed. It is the meat and potatoes. And we have, well, one would say the most special guest. David, I've already introduced you before we dive into this, but thanks so much for joining the show.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
We spend a lot of time with each other, but both sometimes in person, but also obviously remote because we work with each other individually. And as August is our case studies month, I thought it would be great to go through your story, and I'll just give the folks listening and watching at home a little bit of a grounding here. David and I work with each other individually, and for about the last year, and our goal collectively has been to both succeed in the sporting goals that we're going to talk about because you have been very, very successful over the course of the last year, but also help you sort of show up in the other areas of life. And so hopefully today we can unpack this in the form of a case study and hopefully provide some lessons and a little bit of inspiration. So to kick us off and get us going, I like to do this with all guests because I think it's important. I like to sort of get grounded, as it were. And so we're going to do it with you. Why don't you provide the audience with just a little bit of background, all the really simple stuff, where you grew up, what your family situation was. I think it provides context.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in the Bay Area, in the San Jose area. I was an only child. Was Spent most of my life in California and was lucky enough to go to school for my undergrad at USC down in Southern California. And most recently moved up to the Seattle area where I now live with my wife of 7 years and our two kids. Our daughter's 3 years old, our son's 1 year old, and we have a golden retriever that's 6 that is equally part of the family.
Fantastic. And so, why don't you give a little context of what your role is from a professional standpoint? So, what do you do in the real world, as I like to say?
Yeah, so I am a investment partner at a private equity investment firm. So essentially, we invest in software companies that are growing, and our goal is to help them, go from good businesses to good companies. And so we invest in these businesses, we grow them for 3 to 5 years, and ultimately we sell them and try to generate returns for our investors. So that's sort of the crux of what my firm does as a role. And in terms of my specific job, I'm responsible for managing about six of those investments. And so I sit on the boards of those six companies and play a pretty active role in helping those CEOs and management teams grow their companies. I obviously have my direct team at Mainsail that I work with. And I also help co-run the firm with my partners. So it's sort of a multifaceted job.
And on top of it, just grounding everyone listening, I would say the epitome, the case study of the time-starved athlete, because everything you just explained there as the partner. But then I just want to remind folks, not just that golden retriever, who's very, very cute, by the way, but two kids under the age of 4, 3 and 1. I think that's right. Yeah, so it must be
That's
chaos.
right.
And
It is chaos, but it's fun.
and you are training for and competing in both half Ironman distance and, as we're going to unpack a little bit, Ironman distance racing. So, the first question I'm sure you get when you sit at dinner parties and someone mentions that you've done an Ironman is, how do you fit it all in? So hopefully we can go through some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a typical topic of conversation, both socially and professionally.
And so I always like this question because it's very interesting of how folks stumble into this sport, which is ultimately an individual sport. There's a lot of team dynamics around it, which people from the outside don't realize. A lot of community, etc. But growing up, were you always an endurance athlete? What were the sports that you loved to do growing up?
I was a big team sports fan. So I grew up playing basketball, football, but my first love in terms of sport was basketball. I played competitively through most of my childhood, competitively in high school, had the opportunity to play smaller division, two division three basketball, but opted to prioritize education and did my best to make the USC basketball team. I got cut a couple times and hung it up there. But yeah, basketball was my traditional sport, and really no exposure to endurance sports. I was a decent runner as part of my training for basketball, but didn't own a bike when I picked the sport up. Didn't run hardly 10 miles a year probably, and didn't know how to swim. So I really started from scratch right around the, I guess, pre-pandemic 2019.
Yeah, so okay, so you haven't been in triathlon for long. Yeah, what that was always the follow-up question. So what was the catalyst? What was the route to triathlon?
So I think in general, I've always had a respect for triathlon, what it meant to do three sports, especially in the long courses and the 70.3s and the Ironman distance. So always a sense of respect and my gosh, wouldn't that be a cool thing to do someday? But very, very remote from my day-to-day life and my day-to-day experiences as an athlete. So the gateway for me, which may resonate with some of the folks that listen to the podcast, is I got a Peloton and I started doing 30-minute classes, 45-minute classes, and then I had a few friends that started getting into triathlon, and one encouraged me to sign up for a half, and I said, well, I don't own a bike, I don't run, and I don't swim, but I like what I'm getting out of endurance sports, and specifically sitting on a trainer, and so let's try it. So that was the midpoint of 2019. So I was basically sitting on a stationary bike, just dreaming about doing it, and then it sort of evolved from there.
I see a tension of a positive and a negative emerging because we all know what happened in early 2020, and therefore there were no triathlons to be had. At the flip side, you maybe had some modalities to keep you fit and keep you structured while you were sort of removed from everyone, as we all were.
Yeah, I mean, so the last half of 2019, I basically took the opportunity to get introduced to the sport, learned how to ride a bike clipped in, learned how to swim, albeit not very well, and had the running backbone from just my years playing basketball that I was able to pull off the 70.3 distance. But then the pandemic hit, and right when the pandemic hit, I had my first child. And so 2020, all shots were off in terms of trying to progress in the sport. I definitely digressed and used what time I could to try to get a run in here or there, but there was really no triathlon for me in 2020. And it wasn't until 2021 where I kind of got back into it.
It's funny. It's completely tangentially. Most people have. I guess we all have our pandemic stories, as it were. But having a child right in the height of that must have presented so many challenges in a different way. Yeah.
Oh, it was stressful. I mean, I'm sure like everybody, I was Lysoling groceries, closing windows early in the early days of the pandemic. We just wanted to do everything we could to protect our newborn. So that was definitely a major stressor as it was for everybody, but for different reasons.
Well, let's dig in, and what I'm hoping for, there's a word that I keep coming back to when I reflect on your recent success at IRONMAN Coeur in Idaho, which is coachability. We talked about this, I think, just a couple of days after the race, and I said you're a prime example of great coachability, and really fostering a really positive coaching relationship. At least from my side, I guess we'll find out today whether that's reciprocal. But we've been working with each other for just under a year, and you've had a lot of success from the coach's side. That's always good if the coach thinks that you're being a good boy and you're doing well. But I think your story and approach can be a great source of learning for folks that are sort of hopeful to magnify their own performance, particularly if they're interested in collaborating with a coach of any nature. And so, as we do in our case studies globally, we like to sort of go through challenges and say, okay, here's the profile where we've gone through that, some of the challenges. And so, in order to do that, we need to look back in your case. So, I'd love you to give the audience some insight into your prior training, your prior racing, knowing it's a pretty short window. But some of the challenges that you faced and some of the experiences, how did you go about it? What were the challenges? What were the experiences of your early part of triathlon when you were not coached?
Yeah, yeah. So I will provide a little bit of context, but let's double click wherever you think makes most sense. So coming out of 2020, it was clear that there was no commuting to offices for the foreseeable future, largely 2021, and so I had some newfound time on my hands where the my firstborn was approaching a year. We were out of the vortex, and I didn't have to commute because I was working from home. And so the same friend who encouraged me to get involved with the 70.3 had signed up for Ironman Maryland and had sort of floated the idea of me doing it with him. So yeah, talked to my wife, committed to the race, and signed up. And from there, I then figured out I had to probably develop a training plan because you can't just sort of hack your way into a 140.6 distance race. So I bought a book. I followed a program that was pretty generically designed, and I really stuck to that plan. A couple of things happened though that I think are relevant. One is the training definitely became a burden. And so I spent, in peak training, 20, 22, 24 hours a week training. I didn't have a great set of context for taking the easy days easy and the hard days hard. I sort of went pretty hard at every workout. And the result of that was injuries. I had two or three pretty major setbacks over that course of 6 months of training. And ultimately, when I showed up to my full distance Ironman in Maryland in September, I hadn't been able to run for 6 weeks. So you talk a lot about showing up fit and fresh. I showed up exhausted and injured.
Fit and fatigue, fit and injured, and that's it. And I guess digging back into, I think it's interesting just to dig into a couple of components here. And for context, by the way, for folks listening, if they don't know Ironman Maryland is thought of as a quote faster course. There's nothing fast about going 11, 12 hours, whatever it might be. But it's a flatter course. It tends to be more, quote, accessible, certainly than the one that you just did in Coeur d'Alene that's very uppish. But going back into the mindset there, do you think one of the challenges was how you emotionally had this sport? So you're sort of going into the unknown, and you went and got a plan. And I'm assuming, just from, and I'm joining the dots here, so tell me if I'm off, but I'm assuming that you're like, this is the plan. Success means following it, period. And there was probably less putting the plan in context of all of the other demands, all of the other stressors. Were you sort of pretty mutually exclusive in your mindset?
Absolutely. I mean, I viewed success as hitting the volume of hours. Whether it meant doing it at 9 p.m. at night or 4 a.m. in the morning because I had to meet the rest of my demands in my personal and professional life. So it was absolutely all about trying to fit everything into the context of 24 hours, and I was very tired as a result, and that obviously had ripple effects through the rest of my life.
And how did the race itself go?
The race itself was a success in the sense that I finished the race. I had um, probably loftier goals 2 months prior to the race, but given that I was injured, I had literally no running going into the race. I was able to jog a few miles the week leading up. Um, my expectations were fairly low. So in the sense that I wanted to finish, I was able to do that. I obviously it wasn't competitive in the way that I thought I was athletically capable of performing. Um, but it was a success in the sense that I finished, but it wasn't a fun experience. Everything from nutrition and hydration. I just didn't have those tools in my tool set developed, and so I had a lot of I had a lot of issues on the run related to being in that heat, dehydrated, not properly fed, and so it was a success, but it wasn't a fun success.
Yeah, that's and just for context, because we'll come back to your later performances. Do you remember how long it took you the first race there?
Yeah, it took me about 11 hours and 46 minutes.
Okay, so it's still very, by the way, a very decent first Ironman, and particularly coming in injured and coming in, at least through my perspective, fatigue. So you executed it well, probably within context of everything. So let's talk about the transition of focus and the transition of approach a little bit in the pursuit of being helpful to the listeners. We began working with each other a couple of months before your last race of last year, 2022. And I guess the first question is, what was the catalyst? You'd had this experience and you decided to invest in coaching. What was the catalyst for engaging a coach? I guess that's the first question.
Yeah, couple things. I think one, I enjoyed the sport and I wanted to develop as an athlete, and I know that I don't know what I don't know. So that was step one. Two was, the injuries were really really frustrating, and I am a person probably like many others that when you feel something coming on, there's a tendency to just finish the workout. Success is hitting the volume and the goal that you set out for the week, and as a result, I found myself just consistently inconsistent. And what I mean by that is consistently injured. Um, I'd say those two things were early catalysts. The third thing was as I was doing my research and talking to other athletes that worked with coaches, I found that if a coach is doing their job well, they're working with the athlete to understand the context of the upcoming week and the upcoming roadmap and the way of scheduling, where I am in terms of travel, work stressors, life stressors, and then using that as a fabric to create the training plan that is specific to where I'm at in terms of my fitness and my capabilities today. Um, and so those three things I think sort of piqued my interest, and were really the I think the catalyzing forces for why I engaged with a few coaches and started having conversations about working with someone.
So that third point there, if folks are listening that are coaching, and I'm just going to go on a little tangent here. I think you nailed in one of the fundamental basics of being an effective coach that are, and I'm going to borrow your phrase, coaches tend to be consistently inconsistent around this, which is the first thing is not taking a plan and driving it into an athlete's life. The first step is understanding their life on a week to week basis and building the plan around that. And you can get, as a coach, I'm going on a little bit of a soapstone here, but you can get a lot more success out of your athlete with even let's call it a less preferable program if you take that step. Like that's the number one thing that you can do. And I will say the number one frustration of athletes that are leaving coaches is often exactly that element. So I'm so glad that you brought that up as a sort of as a catalyst of wanting a coach, because I think you're absolutely spot on. I think it's absolutely central to what effective coaching is when people are very, very busy. So let's go to our initial months, because I really remember having a conversation. You might not remember this, but in the initial months, I said, I'm hoping that I can underwhelm you a little bit. And you had Indian Wells Half Ironman, which was an early December race. We'd started in September timeframe by my memory, and we were driving towards it. What were the last few months like? It's always a transition, a change. What were the first few months like? What surprised you? What was good? What was bad?
Yeah, mostly good. I think the biggest thing that sticks out to me in hindsight, and I may not have appreciated it in the moment, was patience. The sport is a long game. You really there's no hacks. I mean, physiology is physiology, and it'll catch up to you. And so, what I remember most about those first few months was consistency, consistent habits, and making sure there was good habit creation being formed. And what I mean by that was consistent movement, whether it's running, biking, swimming, strength. We were very consistent on a day-to-day basis. It didn't mean we were doing huge blocks of time, but 30-minute soul-filling run on the trails to, a 45-minute smooth ride to maybe an hour with intensity. We were pretty consistent about doing one of those, three or four things every single day to build it into habit or habit creation. And then on things like nutrition and hydration and pre-workout fueling and post-workout fueling, I think we also nailed a lot of those basics. And at the time, felt a little bit like, hey, when is the ramp going to happen? I hired this coach. I'm expecting to put in tons of volume and tons of intensity. But in hindsight, I now realize these were the basic fundamental building blocks of helping me as an athlete get to where I am now, and then obviously where I want to get to in the future.
Mm-hmm. It's tremendous perspective. I will point out one of the things when I asked about your prior program, the thing you talked about was the plan. The first thing that you talked about when you talked about coming was habits and creation of habits. So you had immediately a broader perspective on this. You went straight to sleep and nutrition and recovery, which is, of course, the methodology that we subscribe to. So it's good that we hear that,
Yeah, and I think two things that are worth highlighting in there. One is, knock on wood, but we haven't had any injuries, working together in the last year. Obviously, I pray that I don't jinx myself. But call it what it is. In the last year, I mean, we've had a few things pop up, but working with you has really taught me to be disciplined about backing off when we sense them and feeling comfortable with what is uncomfortable for folks that are committed to training, which is taking a day or two of recovery to let the body heal. And so, there's the performance results, but also there's such a hangover from being injured when you can't do what you want to do, and a sense of unhappiness that happens. And I've been very happy in the last year to, for the most part, been able to do what I like to do and not have injuries hold me back. So I think that's a direct function of consistency. I also think it's a direct function of implementing strength, which I hadn't done before.
Yeah, that's very true. That was the first thing that we initiated. When I reflect on the first few months, my first catalyst come to my word of this session here, coachability. I really sort of started to realize this is an athlete that's highly coachable. You're arriving to meetings very organized, prepared, engaged, and present, asking questions, both short term and long term, by the way. And I think one thing that helps that coachability is wanting to understand the why. And so they're sort of being open to the knowledge transfer, etc. So I'm very interested around your mindset. You'd engaged, you'd made a commitment, your mindset around coaching and the coaching process from an athlete perspective.
Yeah, well, I think you have to, in order to be successful when you are spread thin across work, life, family, sport, you need to be able to rely on people you trust and that are more knowledgeable than you in their particular areas of expertise.
Hmm.
And that's, exactly, I gave you some sub reasons as to why I hired a coach, but the global point was I wanted to rely and work with somebody that I trusted that knew what they were doing. And if I put myself in that position, then shame on me for not listening. Um, and so, I think there's reasons why, um, I think we got into a good rhythm in terms of trust, and maybe you perceive that as good listening early on. I think we just, when you do your research on coaches, you got to do your research. You got to understand what success stories other athletes have had. You got to just talk to coaches and understand their styles and if it meshes with yours. And I felt like I did a pretty good job in my diligence period of talking to 4 or 5 coaches that were all could have been great coaches, but you know, I made the decision to work with you, and I trusted that decision. And if that decision had let me down, then maybe I wouldn't have listened. But it hasn't to date. And so I think a lot of it comes down to I trusted the research I put in, and if I'm going to work with somebody, I gotta, it's on me to make the most of that opportunity and listen.
Well, there's a great. I think that's great, and you highlighted something that I'm just going to flag as well. You talk to multiple coaches, and that's a great thing because there's it's not just the results, it's also ultimately a relationship. So you've got to sort of, for lack of a better phrase, gel with the coach. Think, hang on, I wouldn't mind spending 30 minutes, 60 minutes, however long it takes each week, going through a discussion, be able to communicate, be able to listen. And so and we all have different styles on that. So I think that's a good thing for listeners to go through. The interesting thing, the catalyst of really asking you to come onto the show was the race, because we talked about coachability, and so far we're sort of keeping it in the clouds a little bit and conceptually. But I think your race experience at Coeur d'Alene, end of June, is a great coached athlete executing as intended. And so I want to take the listeners through the race a little bit, and I think out of that we're going to get some lessons. So leading into the race, why don't you've done one Ironman, this is your second Ironman, you haven't been injured, etc. What were your expectations and hope for the race individually, inside yourself? What were you hoping for when you thought about this race?
Yeah, and it may be revealing in some sense because I always made sure not to talk about outcomes with you because we talk about what we can control, and outcomes are just the outcomes, right? But I have to admit, I mean, I was very motivated to try to be in the top 10% of my age group
Mm-hmm.
and to have a chance to qualify for the World Championships in Nice. So from an outcomes perspective, that was sort of what I had in mind. From sort of a micro level, I wanted to sort of have a good swim. I'm not the best swimmer, as we already heard. I learned how to swim a few years ago. Um, have a strong effort on the bike, and so for me, that's probably somewhere in the top 20, 10 to 20% of the age group. But then show up for the run, being able to execute because that is probably in my natural strength of the 3 sports. And I wanted it to be a smooth day, and it was a good day, and the outcome was achieved. But it was not a smooth day out there on the course, which you draw up the plan, you have a way you see things going, you envision it, and nothing goes according to plan.
And we'll get into that. There's something that you said earlier at the start with, and I'm really glad that you said that. You hope to be top 10% your age group. You would love to have qualified. Those are the things that get us out of bed. Like those are the things. It's great to have dreams. Quite often, when we talk about the coaching process and we talk about not focusing on the outcomes, focusing on the things you can control, I think that is really, really important. But we must appreciate that you've also got to have vision, dreams, hopes, desires. Like that's what it would look like. That would be fantastic because that's the thing that gets the juices flowing. The thing is, we can't think about that outcome while you're in the middle of the swim, while you're coming out of the transition, while someone gets a flat tire on the bicycle, etc. You think about actions. Before we go into the race day, and we'll give you a couple of minutes to summarize it. I want to go back to pre-race because every coach, every athlete has a pre-race strategy, if you want to call it that. So, what were your memories of how we set up the approach, both in terms of sort of quick strategy, but also mindset? Like, what were the instructions?
Yeah. Well, um, from a training perspective, I think we built really well through the last 5 to 6 weeks going to the race, and we started a proper taper probably 8-ish, 9-ish days before the race.
Hmm.
So came into the week physically feeling good and fresh, but not dormant either. Like we were still working intensity into the program not too long ago. Yeah, so showed up to race week feeling physically fresh, and the two of us obviously brainstormed and iterated a few times on a race plan, and so we had very sort of specific both targets, nutrition and hydration plans, as well as just mottos, things to think about to just simplify things when you're out on the course. And I'd say I came in very rehearsed and could probably tell you every single word on that plan because we spent a lot of time building it together. But what I remember most about uh, heading into the race was our last conversation where you said, okay, success. We built the race plan. You know it. I know it. Um, but here's the thing, that race plan is going to get broken somewhere along the way of the day. And you're gonna have to remember that the goal is to get from point A to point B as quick as possible. And so there's going to be things that happen that are out of your control. Don't get hung up on them because they don't align with the race plan. Remember to be resourceful and use all the tools in your toolkit to make sure you do what you need to do to get from point A to point B. And I remember hearing that, and in my mind, I said, oh, I hope he's wrong, of course.
Of course.
But it turns out, you were right. There were some hiccups throughout the day.
And that's why don't we go to the very end here, the outcome, and then I'm going to come back and tell the story because I think the story is given great context. You qualified to Hawaii. You what place in your age group? I'll let you say it.
I finished seventh out of about 120 starters,
So
or excuse me, finishers. Yeah.
so if you if you were telling it afterwards and just hearing that, it'd be like dream day. Like, oh, goodness me, like everything fell into place. Fantastic. You're heading to Nice. It's going to be a great race. Congratulations. It's great when a plan comes together. So,
Yeah.
so give us 2 minutes on the race.
Yeah. Well, the one thing to add to that too is the time I had in my head that I thought would get me where I wanted to be in terms of all those outcomes was basically the exact time I finished the race in. So it's comical that I had this exact plan, both in terms of times, in terms of race strategy, but I still got from point A to point B in the right amount of time, but the journey was quite different. So let me hit you with a few of the quick bullets from the day. So an Ironman Coeur d'Alene on the swim, it's two loops, and you come out of the water and you run back into the first buoy. And so that was great. I had a good first loop. It was my PR in terms of a 70.3 swim. And so I go back into the water feeling pretty happy about the first 37 minutes of the day. As soon as I get back in the water from standing up to laying horizontally to swim, my right hamstring completely cramps up. And so I had to pull off to the side and stretch out my hamstring. It obviously threw me for a loop. I decided to get back into the water after a minute of getting my hamstring to loosen up and just sort of decided to not push it too hard on the way back out. And anyways, finished with a fine swim for me. Probably, I'd I would just say that not the best swim for probably most of your of the swimmers that are listening. But look, it was a fine swim. Got into transition, wanted to move quickly because of the lost time. Got on the bike, realized I left my caffeine and my some of my nutrition at T1. Um, threw me for a little bit of a wrench, but just decided that I had to be resourceful with with the aid stations. So in my mind, I already knew that I had enough fuel and hydration to get me through a few hours, and I was going to have to make some adjustments to my fueling plan in terms of what I picked up and when I picked it up. So no big deal, adapted. Um, Good first loop on the bike, second loop. So heading into mile 70 or so, I did notice that I started to get a little bit mentally tired, a little bit distracted. Hit some rumble strip, and out went all my electrolytes, all my nutrition, my flat tire repair kit. Um, so I won. That was a wake up call that I needed to get my head back in the race and probably needed to eat a little bit more.
Mhm.
Um, Second, it was also like you gotta be careful and not get hurt out here. So as I continued to ride the bike, we got to about mile 80, mile 90, and things got worse. My legs completely cramped up. Started with a little bit of cramping in one leg, and about 5 miles later, my legs just locked. And so adapted the hydration plan, loaded up on the Gatorade Endurance they give you at the aid stations, and basically did everything I could from a riding perspective to give my legs a chance to catch back up because I knew I still had a marathon ahead of me. So at that point in time, I just didn't know what was going to happen with the day. I thought maybe there's a chance my race is done because I've never experienced my legs locking up like that. So um, luckily, legs came back to life a little bit around mile 100. Just decided to take it easy on the way home, not push it. Got into transition, um, refueled, rehydrated, put my running shoes on, and said, "Let's see what happens here." And it was just the craziest thing. I started running, and I just felt great. Um, and I think some of that was the combination of the mental relief of not feeling those cramps, and the juxtaposition of cramping versus not cramping will make anybody happy. But I also think it was the refueling and hydration on mile 90, mile 100 at the end of that ride to make sure I was set up for a good run. And then from there, we just frankly followed the race plan. It was a bit of a diversion, obviously with the cramping, but fell back into a groove. I remember the two words we talked about on the run were stand tall,
Yeah.
and that was my mental cue for the run. And splits were I was pretty happy with the splits. They were on the faster end of the range. We thought would be good, and was able to pull off a better than expected run, albeit with a slower than expected ride with a bunch of turbulence and hurdles.
Yeah, so the Gatorade Endurance was certainly nowhere near your race fueling plan before. We weren't anticipating putting any of that syrup in your body as well. And actually, if you look at the Yobito outcomes and post hoc, the last 20 miles, you wouldn't be very happy with that average power. Yeah, you are. I mean, basically having to really be patient on that
Really
as
be patient. Really be patient. And it was frustrating too because I'd passed a lot of folks on the bike and I was feeling good, and everyone I passed me. And I'm sure in their minds they were like, told you so. I saw you, flying
yeah.
by me earlier. Like this is going to catch up to you, and they were right. I think I just went out a little bit too hard on that first loop, um, but luckily was able to sense that it was starting to cause some physiological stress that could impair my ability to finish the race, and recognized that and decided not to power through it. Decided to back off, make sure I got sodium and calories into my system, let my body reset so I was set up for a good run.
Well, I tell you, you had firstly, this is Iron Man. I mean, this is just I'm sure there are so many people listening going, "Oh, I had the same thing," etc. But it's decision making, and the reason I really like the story is, firstly, the outcome was great for you. You achieve your goal, but to get there, it was not written in the script. It forced adaptation. But on top of that, there were so many off ramps for you mentally. So there's, we talked about staying in the moment, making smart decision making, problem solving. But how did you manage to stay so strong, remain committed? Because so often when something goes wrong, you have multiple times where it's just like, this isn't my day, vroom. And as soon as the mind goes, the body's going to follow that pathway, of course. So how did you manage to stay committed on that?
Um, I think that one element of it is even though this is an individual sport, in many ways it's a team sport. It requires a really good support system from a great coach, friends, and family that provides you the capacity to put in the work to be able to show up and perform. And so, in a moment like that, there was never any question that I was going to just throw in the towel and quit. And not just for myself, but there'd been a lot of work and a lot of sacrifice that the team has put in to get us here. And so my mentality in moments like that is I need to adapt and adjust the strategy, but we're not throwing in the towel. We're just going to do the best we can given the circumstances. And so I think a lot about that. Like, you had warned me that this could happen and we might have to adapt. And my family's sitting in the town of Coeur d'Alene waiting for me to show back up. I'm not just gonna hang it up and call it here. So never was there a question about commitment to finishing the race to the best of my ability. I think there's a tension between your heart and your brain in moments like that. Your heart saying, let's go, let's fight, let's go through it, let's go as hard as you can. And your brain's telling you, well, if you want to get from point A to point B as fast as possible, riding at 250 plus watts, up a hill without the right, nutrition, hydration is just, you're just going to
It's
fall
gonna
off. Exactly. So, yeah, I didn't have any issues with the commitment side. It was just balancing the, emotional side with the brain.
so a couple of quick fire questions to finish.
Sure.
Firstly, what hearing your story, your progression, it's a great case study. But what were your biggest couple of lessons that you've gained over the last season of progression?
Oh, well, I would say it goes outside of the context of just the sport, but just in terms of a lot of life lessons. And I'd say a couple that come to mind are we talk a lot about key sessions, throughout the week in our training programs. And I think that can be applied to both work and life. There are certain sessions or times or meetings where you really need to bring your best self and your best sense of focus. You can't just be your best self and best focused self at every moment.
Yeah.
Uh, and so being selective about how you prioritize, and then also feeling comfortable with, keeping the easy days easy, whatever that means in the context of life, work, or training. So that perspective versus just going hard at everything all the time has been really, really, really helpful for me. Um, and I'd say just really, really good habits that have been, you know, laid down foundationally for hopefully the rest of my life in terms of, nutrition, what I eat, when I eat, regardless of training. Obviously, post race fueling is a big deal when it comes to recovery and habit creation. Uh, Making sure I'm hydrated so that I'm able to show up to work, as best as I can. So there's a lot of, I'd say, physical and sort of habitual things that we picked up on that are definitely helpful in the rest of my life. But I'd say, yeah, the time management prioritization piece, as well as some of the health habits that we made, or that we've created and instilled over the last, call it year, have probably been two of the biggest lessons and things I'm certainly carrying forward.
So my last question, if I can just sneak it in, knowing that we're up against Father Time here, but the sporting journey itself. So many people say, "How do you have time for this?" But you've obviously found time. You've integrated it. What's the impact? We know what the impact has been on your sporting results. What's the impact been on how you show up on the rest of life, family, friends, and then you as a leader in many ways?
Yeah, there is a very notable halo effect from this piece of training into the rest of my life, and whether that be with family, with my colleagues at work. I think in general, feeling far more present. And I think that bleeds into there's a sense of achievement that I'm, you know, doing what it is I like to do, but also, organizationally hitting the plan. I also think there's a big element of energy management where, look, you're getting a stimulus from the training, and if you're following good nutrition, hydration habits, sleep habits, all of that just makes you a healthier, more present individual, whether it's with your family or with your colleagues at work. And so I just think that everything I've picked up over the last year is very multifaceted in terms of how I can apply it to other areas of my life. So I've been very, very pleased and wasn't expecting that, frankly, coming out of the early days of deciding to hire a coach.
That's a great way to end, and that's a great perspective. So, David, thank you, and most importantly, thank you for being a great part of Purple Patch. And I tell you what, I think your story genuinely will really inform and inspire many people that are ultimately trying to crack their recipe, not necessarily getting ready for Ironman competition, but just feeling better and showing up and improving. And I think that's what we're all united in, is trying to become better versions of ourselves. So I wish you the best of luck and look forward to continue the relationship.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Take care. Guys, thanks so much for joining, and thank you for listening. I hope that you enjoyed the new format. You can never miss an episode by simply subscribing. Head to the Purple Patch channel of YouTube and you will find it there, and you could subscribe. Of course, I'd like to ask you, if you will subscribe, also share it with your friends, and it's really helpful if you leave a nice positive review in the comments. Now, any questions that you have, let me know. Feel free to add a comment, and I will try my best to respond and support you on your performance journey. And in fact, as we commence this video podcast experience, if you have any feedback at all, as mentioned earlier in the show, we would love your help in helping us to improve. Simply email us at info@purplepatchfitness.com or leave it in the comments of the show at the Purple Patch page, and we will get you dialed in. We'd love constructive feedback. We are in a growth mindset, as we like to call it. And so feel free to share with your friends. But as I said, let's build this together. Let's make it something special. It's really fun. We're really trying hard to make it a special experience, and we want to welcome you into the Purple Patch community. With that, I hope you have a great week. Stay healthy, have fun, keep smiling, doing whatever you do. Take care.